My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them flat against the wooden defense table to steady them. Judge Caprio was looking at me over his glasses, waiting for my answer, and the silence in that courtroom felt heavier than the medals I once wore on my chest. The prosecutor had just called me a liar in front of everyone, an 84-year-old man standing accused of deception, of hiding something for nearly half a century. What was at stake wasn't money or pride. It was my name, my service, and the last fragile piece of dignity I had left. And the truth behind it all was bigger than anyone in that room realized. Before this story unfolds completely, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment sharing where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, then tap that notification bell. What happens next in this courtroom will stay with you long after this video ends. I stood there, swallowing against the dryness in my throat, and forced myself back into that moment. The courtroom lights were brighter than I remembered from television. They washed over the polished wood benches and bounced off the brass railing. I could smell paper and old varnish. There was a faint hint of someone's cologne drifting from the gallery. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm 84 years old. My back is slightly bent from years of labor after I left the service, and my hands are knotted with arthritis. I wore my only suit that morning, charcoal gray, pressed carefully by my granddaughter the night before. The jacket felt too tight across my shoulders. Judge Frank Caprio sat steady in his chair, calm as still water. His robe fell neatly over the bench. His eyes weren't cruel, but they were sharp. He studied me like he was trying to understand something beneath the surface. To my right stood the prosecutor, Mr. Daniels, younger than my youngest son would have been if my boy had lived past 40. Daniels had a straight spine and a voice that cut clean. He shuffled his papers with crisp movements, confident. Behind me, the gallery was half full. I could hear the soft scrape of a chair as a woman adjusted her seat. A man cleared his throat. A whisper passed, then died quickly. I was accused of falsely claiming a veteran's housing tax exemption I'd received for decades. According to the city audit, my discharge status had been listed as honorable, but someone had uncovered an old document that suggested otherwise, a document buried in 1976, a document I had never spoken about. Mr. Daniels said I had knowingly misrepresented my status for 47 years. 47 years. The number echoed in my mind like a slow drum. My palms were damp. I wiped them on my trousers and tried to stand straighter. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Bennett," he said gently, "help me understand how this happened." His tone wasn't accusatory. It was curious. That scared me more. I glanced toward the gallery. My granddaughter Lily sat in the second row, 24 years old. She had my late wife's eyes. She was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were pale. Beside her, her fiancé Mark sat stiff, arms crossed but jaw tight, protective. Behind them sat Mrs. Alvarez from my old neighborhood, her gray curls pinned neatly. She had brought cookies to my house for years. She gave me a small nod. I took a breath. "It wasn't supposed to be a lie, Your Honor," I said, my voice cracking. A murmur passed through the room. Someone shifted. I heard a pen drop. Mr. Daniels stepped forward. "With respect, sir, records show you were issued a general discharge under review in 1976, yet you signed documents claiming an honorable discharge in 1978 when applying for benefits." His words were precise, like he had practiced them. I felt my chest tighten. The truth had been sitting inside me for nearly half a century. It had weight, it had teeth. I licked my lips. There's more to that story. Judge Caprio's gaze softened. "Then let's hear it." The courtroom clock ticked above us. Each second felt like it pressed against my ribs. I hadn't intended to hide anything, not at first. In 1976, I had come home from overseas after 3 tours. Vietnam had carved lines into my face that never left. I was 34 when I returned. I felt 80 then. I had served as a communications specialist, not a hero, not a general, just a man with a headset and a radio, relaying coordinates and calling in support. But those voices I heard through static never left my ears. During my 3rd tour, There was an incident. Orders came down that didn't sit right. A location marked as hostile. I double-checked the coordinates. Something felt off. I reported the discrepancy to my commanding officer. He dismissed me. The strike went through anyway. Later, we learned civilians had been in that area. Families, children. The courtroom seemed to shrink as I remembered the heat of that day. My hands trembled again. I filed a formal complaint, I told the judge, about the orders. Mr. Daniels raised a brow. And you believe that complaint led to your discharge review? I nodded slowly. The review came months later. Technicalities, questioning my conduct, saying I had bypassed protocol. They called it insubordination. I never faced court-martial. They didn't have enough. But my discharge papers were marked for further review. General under honorable conditions, pending final classification. Then the paperwork stalled. Years passed. I married Margaret in 1977. We bought a small house in Providence. I worked at a machine shop. The city clerk asked for my discharge status for the property tax exemption. I brought the paperwork I had. It said, General under honorable conditions. The clerk looked at me and said, That counts. I never forged anything. I never altered a line. The city processed it as honorable, and I never corrected it. That was my secret. I never corrected it because part of me feared that reopening it would reopen everything else, the investigation, the strike, the faces I never saw but imagined. In the gallery, Lily's eyes shimmered. Mr. Daniels paced slightly. So you knowingly allowed the city to assume an honorable discharge? His tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm. Yes, I said. A woman in the back, I later learned her name was Carla Jenkins, shook her head subtly. Beside her, an older man named Mr. Hanley crossed his arms tighter. Judge Caprio rested his hands together. Why? The question hung there. My throat tightened. Because I was tired, Your Honor. I was tired of fighting something bigger than me. Silence. Respect isn't demanded by status. It's earned through actions, Judge Caprio said quietly. But integrity matters too. His words hit me square in the chest. I felt exposed, not as a veteran, as a man. Mr. Daniels presented another document, a letter dated March 12, 1979. It showed I had been notified my discharge classification remained under review indefinitely due to administrative backlog. That letter suggests you knew the matter wasn't finalized, he said. I did. But what he didn't know was that 6 months later, my commanding officer from overseas wrote me privately. He admitted, in careful words, that my concerns about the coordinates had been valid. He said the internal investigation had quietly cleared me of wrongdoing. He couldn't officially amend the file without reopening the entire incident. He told me to move forward. I never showed that letter to anyone until that day. My hands fumbled inside my jacket pocket. The paper was folded, edges worn thin. Gasps rippled as I unfolded it. I brought this, I said. Judge Caprio motioned for the clerk to take it. The clerk, a young woman named Elise, read quickly before handing it to the judge. As he read, his expression changed. Not dramatic, just thoughtful. Mr. Daniels leaned slightly forward, trying to catch a glimpse. The room felt suspended. We all carry burdens, the judge said softly after a long moment. The question is whether they break us or build us. My knees nearly gave out. The letter confirmed the internal clearance. It didn't officially change the discharge classification, but it acknowledged that my actions had been appropriate, that I had tried to prevent civilian harm. Mr. Daniels looked unsettled for the first time. But the official record still stands as general under honorable conditions, he said carefully. Yes, I whispered, because I didn't have the strength to chase paperwork through Washington for years. Mrs. Alvarez dabbed at her eyes. Mark uncrossed his arms. The judge leaned back. Truth doesn't shout, he said. It waits. I closed my eyes briefly. The pivot came when Mr. Daniels asked one more question. Mr. Bennett, did you ever financially benefit significantly from this classification difference? The exemption saved me about $200 a year, enough to fix the roof, enough to pay medical bills when Margaret got sick. I didn't live rich, I said. I lived modest. The gallery murmured softly. Carla Jenkins leaned toward Mr. Hanley, whispering something. He shook his head, but less firmly this time. Judge Caprio asked for a brief recess. When he left the bench, the tension shifted into whispers. Lily rushed forward and gripped my hand. "Grandpa, why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her and saw my younger self reflected back. "Because I wanted you to see me as whole," I said. When court resumed, Judge Caprio spoke slowly. "Mr. Bennett, the law requires clarity. The city made an administrative assumption. You did not correct it. That is a lapse." My chest tightened. "But," he continued, "this court also recognizes context." He described my service record, my lack of prior offenses, the letter from my commanding officer. "Justice without compassion is just revenge with a gavel," he said. I felt something inside me crack open. He ruled that I was not guilty of intentional fraud. However, he ordered a formal correction of the record and a repayment plan for a portion of the exemption, adjusted based on hardship. Not a crushing penalty, not a free pass. Balanced. The room exhaled collectively. Mrs. Alvarez smiled openly. Lily sobbed quietly. Mark placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Carla Jenkins gave a small nod. Mr. Hanley uncrossed his arms fully. As I stood there, I didn't feel destroyed. I felt seen. Judge Caprio looked at me one last time. "Mr. Bennett, courage doesn't end when the war does. Sometimes it begins when we tell the truth." I nodded, tears finally sliding down my cheeks. Walking out of that courtroom, my steps were slow but steady. The wooden doors felt lighter than when I entered. Outside, the air was crisp. For 47 years, I had carried a secret born from fear and exhaustion. Not malice, not greed, just weariness. And that day, I laid it down. Now I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have corrected the record decades ago, even if it meant reopening old wounds and risking everything? And consider this. What truth in your own life have you been carrying because it felt easier than confronting it? Drop your perspective in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story moved you, show some love with a like, subscribe to see more, and turn on notifications. Send this to someone who needs this message today. The next story is already queued up. Click it now. Tomorrow, another powerful moment awaits. See you then.